probably could rephrase that question about where we go from here and where are we now. And my argument here is that actually a very rudimentary state in the UK. I think I could count in one hand the number of research workers at the moment that are working throughout the United Kingdom. There's one here, of course, Jonathan, myself, John Gow in Glasgow, and a few of the researchers that we are currently funding. We're funding 9 projects at the moment throughout the UK, but they're very small, basic projects. I was at the IACFS conference this year in Fort Lauderdale, and I did think it was the best conference I've been to ever, in fact. And I think many folk would agree with that. I'm seeing a few nods. It was more like a science conference that I'm used to in terms of cardiovascular research. There was some basic research, there was some new ideas, some new data. I'm very strong on data. Let's have some results. Neil's responsible for this, but we just have a look at what I told the Gibson Inquiry. You've, in the number of research papers here, 2002 to 6, 783. You compare that to MS, for example, which probably has a lower prevalence, in fact, probably a lot lower prevalence. It's 1 per 1,000 in England, but it's 1.4 per 1,000 in Scotland. Probably looking at 4, 5 per 1,000, at least in Scotland, CFS. Probably very similar to, in fact, the figures that Dan spoke about a moment ago. So in terms of publications, it is small scale. There isn't that many biomedical studies. And we have a lot of hypotheses. And if you just look at this next thing here, that 90%, there's an awful lot of writing in chronic fatigue syndrome, ME. A lot of reviews, letters, editorials, commentaries. Not that much data. And that's what we're very short of. And that's what I want to speak about today, how we're going to get that data. Here's some of the UK collaborations. You see 36 papers from the London Medical Schools. Of course, a lot of that is from biopsychosocialists, whatever that is. And you can see my own contribution there from Dundee, 4 Glasgow papers in those years, 2002 to 6, and scattered papers throughout the UK. It's not as strong a representation as Dan was talking about as far as the US is concerned. And I do think we have to change that. And how are we going to change it? That's something that I want to focus on today, about what, this is more a political talk about what's actually going on in the UK. There's been a very powerful commitment to, or argument about MRC, NHS, research and development, to give you some idea about that. The projected budget for that is, for 2007-8, is £1.3 billion, over $2 billion. And you can see there are 2 branches of charities there. Remember, in the United Kingdom, we have some very powerful charities, general charities, Action Research, for example, Wellcome Foundation, which is actually bigger than the MRC in terms of its grant giving. And I want to just separate these 2 things out and talk about them very briefly as best I can. Should we get some of that money? Well, absolutely we should. But the fact is that we don't. There's a number of reasons for that. The culture is very negative within the MRC about ME, stroke, chronic fatigue syndrome. I think that record there that I used for the Gibson Inquiry, 14 applications, none funded. I'm not sure that's still true. Maybe they funded 1 or 2, maybe 1, maybe 2 biomedical projects. They have, of course, funded hugely on cognitive behavioural therapy and graded exercise therapy in terms of several £1 million in the United Kingdom. And there's a great debate about that, and so there should be. Because we haven't had the degree of funding that we would want. On the other hand, the data's not there. That's something I think that we have to do as a charity and other ME charities that provide the framework and the substance for applications to go to the MRC. Because that's the central problem, that it isn't the only way to fund research to go to the MRC. It isn't. In fact, in all my years of work in a vascular unit, there was only 1 MRC grant, and that was very hard to get and very hard fought for. And charities have responsibilities. Many folk didn't realize that the vast majority of research in the United Kingdom is funded by charities, general charities. Cancer Research UK has a budget larger than the MRC. 2006, it was £450 million. One cancer charity in the UK. So we have a responsibility as charities as well to fund research, to commission research, and to get things done, to get things moving. It happens in other diseases. And it needs a vehicle, a funding vehicle, in the sense that the charity has to be well structured in the way it funds research, not willy-nilly. And I'm just going to use this time left here to use my own charity and how it works, how it operates, and how we fund research, and how we want applications, by the way. We're not a rich charity by any means, but we are looking to fund good hypothesis-based research. And we have some money there, and we can get more. The problem actually is, or always one of the problems is to find folk who are actually interested in working in this field. It is a serious difficulty. And I will explain that in a moment. That's the aim. It's very simple. Fund research, improve the knowledge, and obviously go towards developing a therapies and treatment. And there is a process here. It's not a particularly difficult process. It's no different to, say, Arthritis Research Council. We've used them, in fact, to build this picture. All of the applications are peer-reviewed, virtually all. We wouldn't send out for peer review a small application if someone wanted a few £1,000, £5,000. We thought it wasn't necessary, a pilot study to do something. We've done that in the past. We would process that in-house. But nearly all of the applications go out to peer review. They've got to be relevant, of course, and we're looking for hypotheses. What is the idea you're trying to convey? How are you going to go about it? Yes, it has to be original, but we're not averse to funding something that's old. There's an awful lot of research, a lot of papers sitting out there in the literature, very good papers sitting out there for years. A good example would be SPECT imaging, for example. And the Costas work in 1994, showing brain stem hypoperfusion. Never been repeated, just sits there. We have, in fact, gone to someone to ask if they would repeat that with now better techniques, because the brainstem is very difficult to image vascular-wise. It's got a very low flow. And they said, well, why bother? There was questions about that kind of work. Well, let's validate it. Let's go and do it again. Let's repeat it. Let's improve it. It could very well answer a lot of questions. It could be a diagnostic test. Of course, the peer review process is set up so that we're looking for the best quality. We don't want things done in people's garage either. We are looking to fund work, and it's important for the whole process that we get it done properly and in proper institutions. And we don't want it to fund. I think an important question here is that if another charity is doing it, that's fantastic. We'll either collaborate or we'll leave it alone. That isn't the view of the charity, is to provide funding for those people who can't get core or seed corn funding to get their work established. That's the view of it. Informal inquiry. It's a very simple record here. Through the House, ask for a full application, sent out to 3 reviewers. They may be part of the panel, they may not be. We have sent out certain applications to experts in the field, in inverted commas. Make a decision and send out the award letter or not. Is it valid? Is the science good? It's the first question we ask. Is this a valid scientific application? Is it feasible? I don't want a project from someone on gene array who has never done gene array before. That would seem a leap in faith for us as a charity to fund that kind of issue. So we're looking for people who have expertise in the field. Is it good value for our money? That's important, given the way the money comes to us. And people expect us to be very, very good with the way we deliver our grants. And would you recommend it? And what are your general comments about it? Take that to our management structure with basic scientists, and then to the Board of Trustees to make a decision about whether we fund it. So there is a process, and it's important that you have that process in place. And in fact, the Charity Commission expects it, and I've come down very, very hard with their rules, and we're now a member of the Scottish Charity Committee because, in fact, we're under Scottish legal jurisdiction. So we've left the UK, left London, and now in Edinburgh, but they're just as tough, and I'm grateful for that as well. So my conclusion there is very simple. We do need to beef up that block. We can sit and shout and scream about the MRC, but the MRC is a kind of elite organisation. It's very, very difficult to grab money from them, and there's a lot of call on that money. And we do need to do something about ourselves and our organisations and the way our organisations are structured and to work together. And maybe there are too many organisations. Maybe we'll need to condense them. That's a big problem for us. How do we find new people? And that is a major problem. And there's a lot of very good science in the UK and a lot of very good scientists, a lot of brilliant scientists. In fact, Dundee has a life science building which is ranked 1 in the UK. It's the #1 ranked science place now above Cambridge. Some wonderful life science guys in there. But it's difficult to get them to work on ME. It's very, very difficult. The perception's poor. We had an app. I visited actually a friend of mine, and he phoned somebody else and came back to me and said, well, you know, it's very psychological, this condition. I'm not sure that it's something I want to get involved in. And I find that a consistent feeling when I go out to universities as an academic myself. Would you do this for us? I'm not sure I want to work in that field. Perception's poor. That model dominates, Dan, very strongly in the UK. Very strongly. It's very well funded. And these people are very well organised compared to the biomedical model. And it's sparse money we're looking for. And finally, I come to this question of the diagnosis, and this is my spin on it. I've adapted this Toda paper here. He made a diagram in this paper. I thought it was a rather good one. Fatigue's been a disaster, an absolute bloody disaster. I mean, I've been ill for 27 years, and I can't say I've ever been fatigued. My wife, who works in the hospital, is more fatigued than I am, and I've had a lot of problems, but fatigue? I'm not sure that's the word I would use. And it's common to so many diseases. Name me a disease that's not fatigued, for goodness sake. So we're talking about medically unexplained fatigue. Okay, that's a smaller box. But the biopsychosocialists would tell us it's 2 to 4% of the UK population. That's 1 million people have chronic fatigue, not chronic fatigue syndrome. My own view about this is 0.2 to 0.4 is about right. But where do I get my data from? How do I know? We've just completed a children's project, a biomedical project on children, and we had a hellish job finding 25 kids in Scotland with ME. We had a dreadful job. We've been around the whole of Scotland, GP practices. We've put it ads. We've gone to Charities, Times Trust, who were our collaborators there, and other charities looking for these children. Just not there. But they used to be there because there's a lot of kids. The age we looked for was 9 to 18. And there's a lot of kids have drifted out 18 to 24. So there was some, inverted commas, epidemic, certainly in Scotland. A lot of those kids are now in their early 20s and we're outside our age range. But we don't find many at the moment in the age group of 9 to 18. They may be there, but we couldn't find them. Fibromyalgia, that overlapping. Look at the way these circles come about. Infections. There's a lot of talk in the UK about Borrelia, Lyme disease, and whether or not a lot of ME is, or a lot of chronic fatigue syndrome is Borrelia. And look at that mess. And I'm not a clinician. So as a researcher, this is a disaster. Where are you going to find the patients? I'm looking for patients that have clear-cut diagnosis. That's what I've always worked with, say, in diabetes. Diabetes with neuropathy, without neuropathy. And it's clear. 2 groups and a control group, 3 groups. Essentially, we take patients off the street. We don't have a clinic. There isn't a single clinic anymore in Scotland since Dr. Chowdhury left. There are no clinics. So we're left finding patients, bringing them in, and examining every single one. And that's expensive. Dr. Underwood spends an hour and a half with each patient, taking a careful history. It's expensive and it's difficult. And we don't need to do it. We shouldn't be doing it. We should have a resource there in Scotland or somewhere in the UK where we can access these patients for the research that we want to do. Lots of things we can do. Lots of things. We can promote best practice. We can build academics. We need to get out into medical schools. We need to get things done. There's a lot of very good people out who can do marvelous things, both pharmacologically, lab-based experiments, develop things. It's all there for us. We just need to tap into it. And it's something we're going to have to do much more in the future. And this is, in fact, copied from the Arthritis Research Council, because that's what they do. Where do we go from here? Well, there's a project that we submitted to the MRC. It was turned down. I don't have any problem with that. We wanted to look at 250 patients and under controls. We have a lot of inflammatory markers, apoptotic markers, vascular markers. They turned it down. Can't get it funded. It's expensive. We have got to examine every one of those patients. It's a lot of work. We're talking about probably 400 hours of a clinician's time. That's what we wanted to do, subgroup them. Is it true that patients have signs? Our patients do. 60% of our patients have got neurological signs in the legs. Absent reflexes, knee-jerk, absent plantar reflex. 60%. Is that common? Do you find that, Kenny? Is it common? You find it. So there are signs there. Byron keeps telling me that transcranial Doppler are abnormal. Well, we can do that easily. That isn't a big deal. We have 3 vascular units in our hospital. Should we repeat that? Have a look at SPECT, other neuroimaging techniques? I was very impressed with the IACFS conference and 2 of the presentations there on, one on lactate. I think it was Nestad was his name. It was a very, very good paper, very interesting paper. Let's do it. Dan mentioned about post-exertional myalgia. To me, that's a key. Absolute key clinical finding in these patients. You push me, I'm finished. Simple. But is it true? And how are we going to look at it? And are we going to build it into our tests? We've just done that. We funded Professor Nimmo to look at the IL-6 trans-signaling pathway, IL-6, IL-6R, SPG130, and she just submitted that paper for publication. So, and that was a very difficult post-exertional test on a treadmill. It's called a SATET test, sub-anaerobic threshold exercise test. Very difficult to do, and the patients were ill for days, if not weeks afterwards. It is a problem doing it, but it's important. And that's where we go as a charity. We'll be here tomorrow at mitochondria. We're looking to fund projects in mitochondria. We funded work here on coagulation. We didn't find it. We're funding work in muscle. We're funding some work on the gene array, on brain imaging. I will talk tomorrow about our vascular work, white blood cells. These are projects. They're small grade, but they're there. We are funding them, and we should fund a lot more. We need to get out there and fund a lot more. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.